Hey guys, so picking up where we last left off, I showed you guys the prints as they were done on the Ultimaker 2, and now it is time to talk about how we're going to come along and finish them and try and make them look a little better and put them together into one helmet. So let's dive into it. So clearly these two halves do not look entirely the same as they did before, and I'll explain why. Now, partly for time reasons, I've come along and I have pre-sanded this helmet a little bit, and it is by no means done, but the idea was I was going to come along and try and just sand down any overly rough edges, and it helped. Now for this half right here, I went over it with a couple of coats of my good old standby rust-oleum filler primer. This is what's called high build formula. Normally I would not recommend using this for models, but for something large like this that does not have a ton of tiny details, you actually want a formula that's going to build up a thicker layer of primer very quickly. That said though, get yourself a couple of cans. You will burn through them very quickly over the course of a project like this, especially if you're trying to fight a lot of surface imperfections like I am. Now that said, I'm not going to be trying to make this helmet like perfect, but I definitely want to give you guys a good example of what to do though, so let's dive into the pre-prep. So personally, I find it actually advantageous to come along and do a little bit of work on your prints before you go and assemble them, just in case there are any difficult areas that you cannot reach easily. So in the case of this half, like I said, I just came along and sanded it. I've also installed the wooden dowel pins, which I'll talk about shortly. But the main idea was I was just trying to get the surface A, ready for paint, and B, just knock down any really rough edges. I also grabbed myself this little $20 palm sander from Harbor Freight, and I will say while working with it on PLA directly is not highly recommended, if you're very, very light with your pressure and you're using the finest pad that they sell, which is I believe 120 grit, you can get away with it. It works a lot better though on a model that's been filler primed, but do note that it still will cut through it very quickly. So I would only use it on areas that really need a lot of help. What I'm going to do though, once these two halves get put together and the seam gets filled in, I will use this to quickly rough down the seam, but I'm definitely going to probably come along and wet sand it manually. And when we get to that point in the final video, when we do the final finishing and things like that, I'll go over that. But this is more just general prep. Now, one other thing I will say is I highly, highly recommend you get a respirator with cartridges that are designed for handling dust, and also, if you can afford it, get ones that handle paint fumes. Breathing in paint particles, breathing in primer particles, breathing in plastic particles is not good for you. And also just the paint fumes themselves, especially if you're spray painting in an area that's not got much of a breeze, can very quickly fill up with noxious fumes that are not very good to breathe. So do your lungs a favor, do yourself a favor in the future. Please wear some respiratory protection. It's worth it. Okay, I just mentioned the pins, and it's time to put those pinholes that we put in the part to good use. Now, I had a feeling, and it came true, that the pinholes that I had programmed in were not going to be entirely the right size, but you know what? That's not that big of a deal. I had thought about that, so I have my cordless drill, and I'm going to go ahead and just quickly remount the holes, and we'll come on back. All right, I now have the pinholes drilled out. A bit of advice when you're drilling into a 3D print is go slow on the drill speed and take your time. Also, if you can, step up to the size that fits your dowel pin, so that way you won't overdo the hole size. So let's see if these parts fit together and go from there. So let's see, let's try doing the bottom one first. The end is a little bit swaged out. No, it's going in there. Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna have to trim that shorter. That's what I figured. Oh, that is perfect. Now obviously, because we had the warp on the print bed, we do have that gap up there, which is not ideal, but that's what wood filler is for. So now you guys can see why I put the pinholes in there. And I have to say the alignment between the parts is pretty darn good. Now when I actually go to glue them together with some 3D gloop, I am going to definitely make sure that I visually line the parts up as well, but having the pins in there really, really helps. So let me go ahead, get the parts ready, apply some of this 3D gloop that I have a sample of, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here we go. The helmet is rough fit together at this point. There definitely is that gap that you guys may or may not be able to see. There we go. You guys can definitely see the gap up there. I'm going to come along with some Elmer's wood filler in another video, and we're going to cover how to fill the gap, how to sand this, hit it down with some more filler primer, some of this good stuff. Rust-oleum, if you're watching and you really want to make my day, I would love a couple of cans more of this stuff. It's amazing. But besides the point, we're also going to work on filling in these sides here that actually said technically were not on the original helmet. So I will see you guys here next time. I'll make it with Calvin. And as for me, let me see if this fits my head, because I'm stupid like that. Oh, this is cool. Hey, new intro.